Greta ended her UN speech by holding up diary. In here, she wrote questions we all have to answer. Who am I? What do I believe? What kind of person do I want to be? America gave me the freedom to find new answers different from the ones I was taught. Now, standing in Camp Davidson, Massachusetts, she held tightly to a small leather diary. It was her only link to the life she used to know. The first few weeks in the camp were tough. The German women stayed quiet, sticking to themselves. They spoke in low voices, only in German, during meals. They followed the camp rules without complaining, but they seemed distant, their faces showing they were strong. Captain Margaret Sullivan noticed how they carried themselves, standing tall like soldiers. Even though they were prisoners, they seemed more disciplined than some of her own Americans. June 15th, 1945. The war was over. Freedom waited. As fall turned to winter, something started to change. It began with little moments of kindness from the American Guard staff. One guard, Private Thomas Anderson, a young man from a farm in Nebraska, noticed a German prisoner named Maria Weber. She was a petite woman with blonde hair, and she had a bad cough that wouldn't go away. Without asking anyone, Thomas brought her an extra blanket and a cup of hot tea made with herbs his grandmother had used. Maria looked at him, surprised. Her blue eyes showed she wasn't sure what to think. She had been told Americans were cruel enemies. But here was this young man, not much older than her brother, showing her care. She took the tea and said a quiet thank you in German. For the first time since she was captured, she relaxed a little. News of these small acts spread around the camp. Another guard, Sergeant William Chun, whose parents had come to America from China, knew what it felt like to be seen as an outsider. He started teaching simple English words to the prisoners who were interested. He used hand signals and drawings to explain enough. Greta liked these lessons. She had learned some English in school and found she was good at picking up new words. More than that, she started to see the Americans differently. They weren't full of hate, as she had been taught. Instead, they seemed curious about women. They showed kindness in ways she hadn't expected. By Christmas 1944, things were starting to shift in a big way. Captain Sullivan wanted to do something for the prisoners. Knowing many of them were sad and missing home, she decided to let them celebrate Christmas in a simple way. The women could make decorations from whatever materials were available, like paper and string. What happened next was a surprise to everyone. Greta, speaking carefully in her improving English, asked Captain Sullivan if the women could sing Christmas songs for the guards. She said they wanted to sing German songs, but also try some American ones. That night in the camp's main hall, the 58 German women stood together and sang. They started with O Tannenbaum, a German Christmas song, their voices blending beautifully. Then they sang Silent Night in English. Their accents made the words sound a bit off, but their effort was clear. Private Thomas Anderson wrote a letter to his family about it. He said, "Ma, I never thought I'd say this, but when those German women sang tonight, I forgot we were enemies. They seemed so young, so far from home. It reminded me of my sister Sarah and her friends back in Nebraska. That Christmas evening changed things." The women started talking more with words. They began volunteering for tasks like helping in the kitchen or fixing clothes. It wasn't because they had to. It seemed like they wanted to help. Greta became a go-between, helping translate between the German women and the Americans. Her English got better every day, and she found she liked connecting people. She also learned that many of the American soldiers were just as homesick as the prisoners. They were all young people caught in something bigger than themselves. By February 1945, the camp felt different. The women no longer sat alone during meals. They chatted in a mix of English and German, and laughter could sometimes be heard. Sergeant Chun started informal classes where the women taught German while learning English. But then troubling news arrived. As Allied soldiers moved deeper into Germany, they found terrible things. Concentration camps where millions of people had been killed or mistreated. Stories and pictures of places like Bergen-Belsen and Dachau reached the camp through American newspapers. Greta sat in the camp library reading these reports with shaking hands. The pictures were blurry, but the words described horrors she couldn't believe. She had never heard of these places, but they were in Germany, the country she had served. Maria found her there, tears running down her face. "Greta," Maria whispered in German. "Is this true? Did our country do these things?" Other women gathered around, reading the same papers. They were shocked and confused. These women weren't diehard supporters of their government. They were young people who thought they were helping their country in a war. Now they were learning their country had done things they never imagined. Captain Sullivan watched from a distance as the women tried to make sense of the news. She had seen German male prisoners react with shock to similar reports. But the women's pain seemed deeper. They were questioning everything they thought they knew about themselves and their homeland. That night, Greta wrote in her diary, "What kind of Germany will we go back to? What are we fighting for? I thought I knew who I was. Now, I don't understand anything." By spring 1945, the war in Europe was over. But the German women in Camp Davidson faced a new kind of uncertainty. Across the U.S., male prisoners were being sent back to Germany. But the situation for these women wasn't clear. The government in Washington was still deciding what to do with them. Meanwhile, the women were asking themselves, did they even want to go back? News from Germany described a country in ruins. Cities were destroyed. Families were separated or gone. And the Germany they remembered existed no more. Many of the women hadn't heard from their families in months or even years. They didn't know if anyone was waiting for them. At the same time, life in the American camp had become something they never expected. What started as a prison felt more like a community. The American staff didn't treat them like enemies anymore. They saw them as people caught in a terrible situation to try to find their way. Greta had started writing letters to a local family, the Hendersons, who visited the camp through a church program. Mrs. Henderson, a school teacher, was impressed by Greta's intelligence and how quickly she learned English. She was also touched by how sorry Greta was about what Germany had done. "You're not to blame for things you didn't know," Mrs. Henderson told her. "What matters is what you've learned and what you choose to do now." But even if Americans forgave them, the women knew going back would be hard. People there might see them as traitors or failures for being captured. Worse, they'd return to a country that no longer matched the ideals they thought they were fighting for. As the day approached when the women would learn their fate, they talked more and more about what to do. They had found something special in the camp, a sense of belonging, a chance to make a difference, and hope for a better future. On June 15th, 1945, Captain Sullivan called everyone to the main hall. The women stood together, nervous about what this meant for them. Captain Sullivan spoke calmly but kindly. "Ladies, I have orders about your return to Germany. In 2 weeks, we'll arrange for you to travel to Europe. You'll go through camps for displaced people before going home." She looked at their faces, seeing both relief and worry. But what happened next caught her off guard. Greta stood up, her hands shaking. In clear English, she said, "Captain Sullivan, may I speak for some of us?" The captain nodded. Greta looked at the other women, then spoke again. "We've been talking for weeks. Some of us don't want to go back to Germany right now." The room went silent. Several guards looked confused. Maria stood up next, followed by 12 other women. They stood together, showing they had made up their minds. Maria spoke slowly in English. "Captain, we know this is a strange request, but Germany doesn't feel like home anymore. The Germany we worked for doesn't exist." Captain Sullivan was stunned. All her years in the military, she had never heard of prisoners asking to stay instead of going home. She asked them to explain, and what followed was a flood of feelings that showed how much these women had changed. Greta said they had tried to contact their families. Of the 14 women who wanted to stay, 2 learned their families had died in bombings. The others had no idea if anyone was alive. But more than that, they had found something in the camp they didn't want to lose. "Here," Greta said, "we've learned what it's like to be treated with respect, even as enemies. We've seen kindness when we expected hate. We've had a chance to work and grow into better people." Their request was a big deal. According to the rules of war, they were still enemy prisoners, and the law said they had to go back to Germany. But their words touched the Americans deeply. Private Anderson, who had given Maria that blanket months ago, spoke to Captain Sullivan after the meeting. "Ma'am," he said, "these women aren't our enemies anymore. They're just people caught in something bigger than them, sending them back to nothing seems wrong. That night, Captain Sullivan sent a message to her bosses in Washington, explaining the situation. It would take days to get an answer, leaving everyone in a tense waiting period. The women who wanted to stay kept working hard, as if they wanted to prove they deserved to stay. Greta became even more helpful, translating not just words, but helping others understand each other better. Maria worked closely with the camp's doctor, showing she had a talent for nursing. Other women found ways to contribute, like fixing equipment or organizing records. But not everyone outside the camp was happy about the women's request. Word got out to nearby towns, and some people were upset. Local newspapers wrote articles asking why German prisoners should get special treatment, while American soldiers were still fighting in the Pacific. Others, especially church groups who had met the women, supported them. They wrote letters saying the women had changed and deserved a chance. Mrs. Henderson, the teacher who befriended Greta, brought a group of local people to the camp to speak up for the women. These women aren't the same as when they arrived, she said. They've shown us what it looks like when people change. Finally, the orders came from Washington. The government said any prisoner who wanted to go back to Germany could leave right away. But for those who wanted to stay, there was a surprising option. They could be reclassified as displaced persons, not prisoners, and apply to live in America. This meant they wouldn't be prisoners anymore, but they'd have to find people to support them, jobs, and places to live in American towns. It was a scary but exciting possibility. The 14 women who wanted to stay were divided. 5 decided to go back to Germany, ready to face whatever was there. The other 9, led by Greta and Maria, chose to stay and build new lives in America. Finding support was easier than they thought. The Hendersons offered to take Greta in and help her find work as a translator. The camp's doctor arranged for Maria to train as a nurse at a nearby hospital. On July 4, 1945, the day came for the women going back to Germany. The scene at Camp Davidson was emotional. Instead of a cold, formal send-off, it felt like a community saying goodbye to friends. Those leaving carried letters, photos, and small gifts from the American Guard staff. Most importantly, they carried a new understanding about kindness and hope. Years later, Greta, now an American citizen with children, spoke at the United Nations in New York. She talked about peace and how people can change. She held up her old leather diary, the same one she had carried to the camp. In here, she wrote questions we all have to answer. Who am I? What do I believe? What kind of person do I want to be?